afternoon and welcome to the Apex One News Magazine. I am your host, Ernest Kanjo.
And I'm Nuwaila Mazrui Helmrich.
Another government shutdown looms over Washington as Congress fails to reach a vote for the new coronavirus relief bill. And as the CARE Act programs expires across the country, there is an urgent need to prevent a potentially catastrophic outcome for millions in the United States. On the program today, we measure the degree of damage this could cause, as well as make projections as to a way forward.
And Sweden fails to uphold its coronavirus prevention model status as the country rests on its laurels and becomes a high-risk zone for the spread of the virus. As the Nordic country's neighbors raise an alarm, we find out what prompted Sweden's U-turn and what new measures its government will take to arrest the situation.
And in sports, we journey to South Africa to evaluate progress reaped from the fallout of the 2010 FIFA World Cup. While making this assessment, our correspondent in Johannesburg will also determine if South Africa is or could potentially be ready to vie for an International Olympic Games hosting as well. These stories and more in today's edition of the Apex One News Magazine.
Every nation, society, or community has public figures on whom the lives and livelihoods of the people depend on to a large extent. This includes political figures, either elected or appointed, managers of corporations, economic operators, and at times, celebrities. In contemporary times, we call them influential personalities and opinion leaders. But who are these people in the state of Ohio, and how have they shaped the state of Ohio? Find out in The Elite. The Elite, a program that answers that question. What impact have they created and can create on your life and that of Ohio? The Elite tells us more. The Elite is a new radio show that hosts top brass officials in the state of Ohio to tell us the stories of their careers, how they influence their communities, and what they have in store for their people. The Elite is questions from journalists and listeners. The Elite is every 2 weeks on Apex One Radio, hosted by senior journalist and editorialist Ernest Kanjo. The Elite. Know your leaders and make them accountable. Join us now and let's make history. The Elite. Come enjoy and learn.
But first, here is our editorial, Nuwaila Mazrui Helmrich.
These are the last days of Donald Trump, number 45's representation of this country and its citizens on the global stage has been characterized by obsessive and rabid pleas for recognition and approval, despite his abject failure to engage in any meaningful action to earn them, a vigorous and shameful commitment to pursuing policies intent on destroying the virtues that the vast majority of Americans seek to embrace, and a spineless Republican cabinet that discarded their sanctimonious values to bend the knee and kiss the ring of a democratically elected dictator. From the start, Mr. Trump was unapologetic in his pursuit of totalitarian power to the diminishment of the Constitution, the letter of the law, the voice of the nation, and the constitutionally ingrained mandates of the office of the president. In this, the penultimate edition of the Apex One News Magazine, we take one final look at the last 4 years under President Trump. We were all witness to the most contentious and abusive presidential campaign in modern history. The presidential debates failed to accomplish their most basic purpose, which is to properly inform the voting public on the vitally essential policies proposed by each party for the country's future, and instead devolved into shouting matches and theatrical antics that were an embarrassment to a process that has traditionally demanded common decency and mutual respect. As politicians on both sides of the aisle struggled to establish a new baseline for acceptable political conduct, a struggle that would become a fixture of the new political reality, Mr. Trump bet all his cards on an ideological divide that would set the stage for a brutal assault on American institutions. The fundamental building blocks of the civil rights movements affecting gender, race, gender identity, religion, and immigration policy suffered mind-numbing onslaughts throughout his presidency that reawakened an ugliness in the social fabric of the American landscape that our forebears had beaten back into the shadows. Under his leadership, we were forced to confront a seismic shift in national agenda that, rather than prioritize the wealth and health of the country, sought only to plunder the riches he was elected to defend without any regard for consequence. If there is one thing that has been abundantly clear, it has been this president's use of the office of the president to enrich himself by any means necessary. To that end, he has colluded with foreign powers to degrade the electoral process and in so doing weaken the democracy. He appointed a cabinet with no discernible qualifications to hold political office except a blind loyalty to him and him alone. And even now, in his final days, reports have emerged that a member of his core and nepotistic inner circle, son-in-law Jared Kushner, helped create a shell company with the express purpose of secretly making payments to the Trump family, drawn from the Republican National Committee's coffers to the tune of $600 million. Here's an alternative fact. This was not a presidential term. It was a blatant heist orchestrated in plain sight, and only by the strength of the democratic processes that have been upheld and tirelessly defended by the citizens of this country do we now celebrate its end.
This is the Apex One Radio News Magazine. The United States Congress missed the Friday deadline to reach a vote for the new coronavirus relief bill, threatening a government shutdown. The House entered a last-minute vote for a 2-day extension, which was upheld by the Senate. The chamber has been locked in a congressional standoff and must use this time to hash out the details for the relief bill before the Senate breaks for recess.
CARES Act programs are expiring across the country, and failure to reach a consensus spells a potentially catastrophic outcome for millions in the country. So far, it seems that the two parties have only agreed on the amount of money that will fund the provisions in the bill and continue to deliberate on the finer points of its implementation.
The $908 billion price tag is slated to include the individual direct payment stimulus tax, provisions for reactivative unemployment benefits, funding for teachers and preventive measures in schools, and a Republican-backed clause that would indemnify business from COVID-related lawsuits.
The shooting death of 23-year-old Casey Goodson Jr. at the hands of the Franklin County Sheriff's Office has made national news and rekindled the national conversation and public demands of police accountability. Following the fatal incident on December 4th, a U.S. Marshal working with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office as a part of a fugitive task force said the shooting would be ruled as justified.
The statement spurred public outrage and accusations that the outcome of the investigation into the shooting had been predetermined. In the face of growing public protests, Columbus Mayor Gintam strongly condemned the statement and reiterated the city's commitment to a shift and just review of the facts. The FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice have now joined the CPD, Critical Incident Response Team, in that investigation.
And the COVID vaccine distribution in Ohio began Monday, December 4th. The first batch of vaccines was delivered to several hospitals in the state, including the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, and was administered to frontline workers at these facilities.
The federal distribution program also delivered vaccines to 10 nursing homes around the state. Concerns are growing among several advocacy groups about the order of prioritization for immunization. Governor Mike DeWine has stated that his office is still working to finalize that list. We will have more on this story coming up in this edition of the Apex One News magazine. This is the Apex One Radio News magazine. After weeks of postulating and denial, Senate Majority Leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, finally accepted the election results after the Electoral College confirmed Joe Biden's win on Monday and encouraged fellow Republicans to do the same. But many of his party colleagues, along with some Trump allies, are not ready to fall in line and have vowed to keep fighting to overturn the election. These include Representative Mo Brooks of Alabama, Scott Perry, and members of the media like Fox News commentator Lou Dobbs, to name a few.
Ahead of the Georgia Senate runoff, Georgian Republican Senators David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler have also announced that they are strictly Team Trump and will continue to challenge the Electoral College's votes in an effort to overturn the election. The Georgia Senate runoff, scheduled for Monday, is a key point of interest in this election season, as it will determine whether the Republican Party maintains control of the chamber. The Senate currently stands at 50 Republicans and 48 Democrats.
Another point of contention that seems to be creating a widening rift within the party is the Republican response to COVID-19 prevention measures. Many members within the Republican Party have repeatedly accused Democratic state leaders of abuses of power when it comes to imposing strict guidelines to combat COVID-19 spread. Some Republican officials submitted their resignations this week in protest of the Republican Party leaders' refusal to effectively implement strategies that prioritize the health and safety of their constituents.
And with us, as always, our political analyst, Roderick Numia, is here to shed some light on the situation. Welcome back, Roderick.
Thank you very much.
We're nearing the end of the Trump presidency, but it seems the Republican Party, which has by and large been united behind Trump these past 4 years, is starting to show some significant internal rifts. With Trump out of office and a Democratic president in the White House, what do you think the immediate future of the Republican Party looks like?
It's very, very in a precarious situation, I must say, because two things. One, if you look very carefully, the Republicans who have not yet congratulated Joe Biden as the president-elect are not doing so because they don't want to do it. It's because they're fearing a Trump comeback. And most of these senators and Congress members want to keep their seat because Trump is threatening to find primary contenders for these people in their respective states and districts to unseat them should they support Biden or should they acknowledge Biden's win as the president-elect. So the Republican Party right now is at the verge of losing control in the US Congress and Senate, and they already lost control of the White House, in the sense that the president's rhetoric about this election was rigged is losing the one chance the Republican Party had to hold on to the Senate, which can then give them some voice into government at this time. So Republicans in Georgia are planning not to vote because they believe that the election was rigged. And this is only going to hurt Republicans, but because by the end of January, Democrats might be ahead in the House and in the Senate and the White House, and that will give Democrat latitude to do a lot of things they want to do, and Republicans will have little to no say, because even if they get just one seat, they will have the vice president on their side to break the tie should they be voting on an important law issues coming up in the next 4 years. And as
right, Roderick, we've spoken before about the factions within the Democratic Party, the establishment of or moderates against the progressives, and there was the short-lived Tea Party within the Republican Party. Do you foresee a new iteration of this breakdown in the Republican Party, say Reagan conservatism versus Trumpism?
So I see that happening, but most Republican in the backstage have said, listen, I really don't support this guy. They just don't say it out in public, but they'll call Joe Biden and tell him and say, this is not our guy, but we just have to be quiet at this time because we don't want him to come after us. Yes, there's going to be a division. We're going to have the traditional conservative Republicans, and then there's going to be Trump Republicans, as they call it. And this divisiveness is only going to hurt the Republican Party in the sense that if there's no consensus, if people like Mitch McConnell and McCarthy in the Senate are seen as people that are kissing up to the Democratic establishment in Washington, they might lose that part of the party, which is then going to stand behind ideas that have been propagated by the current president, Donald Trump. And
So Robert, tell me, do you make, what do you make of the Republicans who are now jumping ship, so to speak? Some have suggested that rather than signal a true change of heart, it's simply a political move meant to distance themselves from the Trump presidency. What is your opinion on that?
They are trying to clean house, because I think every voter that voted for Trump, maybe not every voter, but most of them voted for him, and they acknowledge the fact that he lost the election and they want to move on. The same people that thought Donald Trump won in 2016, let us give him a chance to be the president, are still thinking that, okay, Joe Biden has won the election in 2020, let us give him the chance to be a president. So those Republicans that are jumping, it's not jumping ship, but it's doing what is right. You know, I'm going to beg to differ with that word, because they should have done this since election night. They didn't, because they thought that they should give the current president a chance to exhaust all his options of filing lawsuits in the states where he thought they were fraudulent, there were mail-in ballots from dead people. So now that that process has happened, Donald Trump has had about 50 lawsuits thrown out the window. It gives these people some backbone to say, listen, we gave you a chance, we gave the process a chance, and it turns out, because here's what people should also have in the back of their mind. 3 of the Supreme Court judges are Donald Trump appointee. And if they decide that they're not even going to listen to any litigation brought in by the state of Texas, that should tell anybody that it's very open to debate that, okay, there is nothing here, because they should bend over backward to give him back that favor because he nominated them to the Supreme Court. But no, there's absolutely nothing to look at here. So they didn't even bring the lawsuit and look at it last week. They threw it before it even made it to the Supreme Court. Now, everybody has to align themselves with the mainstream. He's exhausted his options. Mitch McConnell doesn't have a choice but to accept it, because we have to do what is right. We have to unify the party. That's why We have to unify the country. That is what he said this week.
And what about the relations between the Democrats and the Republicans, Roderick? Do you think we'll see a return to more collaborative, nonpartisan politics moving forward?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. When Joe Biden was in the Senate, most of his best friends were Republicans, stemming back from the late Senator John McCain, even Lindsey Graham. This week, he actually said he was kind of disappointed, personal disappointment with Lindsey Graham, because they had a personal friendship. Those people spent Thanksgiving at each other's homes. They spent holidays at each other's homes. So they are friends beyond the political spectrum. And Joe Biden has a good history of working with Republicans in Washington and in the state of Delaware in getting things done. And I think he's going to drive himself up to the U.S. Capitol and meet with these Republicans. Instead of sending Chuck Schumer to negotiate for him, he's going to go and say, hey, pal, listen, I've been here. We've done this before. We can do it again. Let's do what is best for this country. I think it is because of his negotiating style that Obama was successful in 2010 in getting the Obamacare passed. And you've got to see Joe Biden as that person that is fair to himself and to his own party. He was the only person in the Democratic Party that acknowledged the successes of George Bush. In as much as everybody thought George Bush 43 was a terrible president, he was the only guy in the Democratic Party that outlined the things that Bush did that was beneficial to this country. So I believe he's going to go back to Washington come January 20th with the same spirit and reach across the political aisle and sell some things and buy some things. It might not be the perfect, but it's going to be work in progress.
Roderick Numia is an analyst with mastery in American politics. Roderick, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much.
This is the Apex One Radio News Magazine.
In Ohio, COVID-19 vaccinations began on December 14th. Governor DeWine announced that 975 doses were shipped to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center in Columbus, as well as UC Health, the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. Initial vaccinations were administered to health workers who are involved with the immediate care of COVID-19 patients at those facilities. More vaccines were subsequently shipped to 8 more hospitals around the state based on population, geography, and access to cold storage facilities.
On Friday, as part of a federal vaccine distribution program, 10 Ohio nursing homes received batches of the vaccine. More doses are expected to arrive Monday, with a projected number of 400,000 by Christmas. Coronavirus infections and deaths are still high in Ohio, with officials calling December the deadliest month so far in the 9-month-long pandemic. The state is yet to determine who will be the next in line for immunization, but advocates for teachers, restaurants, and food service employees and prisoners are lobbying the governor's office for priority.
Victoria Overcomer is a family nurse practitioner with the Columbus Legacy Nurses Mobile Healthcare Clinic. She's with us now to speak about the distribution of the vaccine in Ohio and the expectations of healthcare providers now that the vaccine is finally here. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
Your practice travels around the city to provide healthcare to patients in their homes or at a location of their choosing. What demographic constitutes the majority of your patients? And over the last year, what has your protocol been vis-a-vis the coronavirus?
Basically, the demographics for our patient volume is mainly vulnerable people. About 80% of population is people with Medicaid and uninsured or underinsured. So when you're talking about this corona, the pandemic, that it changed everything. Our model of service for our clinic initially was to we travel around Columbus and provide services to patients in the comfort of their home. But when the COVID hit, we had to stop the services in fear of exposing our staff in getting COVID. So it was just in this week that because we've been having many calls from patients asking for us to come out and see them because they are not able to go to their family doctors and they need medical care. And we just had a meeting yesterday that we're going to start this next week. So what we have done with the COVID, since COVID came, is it's just about adhering to the guidelines that the CDC provided, mainly washing hands, sanitizing, distancing, social distancing, educating patients, wearing masks, and if we have, if we have a patient who has acute COVID symptoms, we have a sign on the door that if you have COVID symptoms, you can wait in your car and give us a call instead of you coming in. And also we limit the number of patients that come into the clinic at a time. So if we have like 4 patients that want to come in and one no, we limit on you come in like 2 patients at a time, and then we sanitize after those patients leave, and then we bring in the new patients.
Right. So, Victoria, as a healthcare provider who works, whose work takes place outside hospitals, but presumably may still come into contact with patients who are potentially COVID positive, do you expect to receive the vaccine sometime soon?
Well, according to, we actually sign up, and still working on it. We're working on it to sign up as a provider for COVID vaccine, because you can go, if you go to the website, the government website, you can actually sign up as a provider to give COVID vaccine, because we also part of the vaccines for children, to give vaccines to children who are underinsured or Medicaid in the Columbus area. So according to, I think, as per, for those of us that have our own practices, I believe we will not likely coming in the new year is when we're going to be able to receive the vaccine.
Now, Victoria, we noted earlier that the state is still in the process of working out a prioritized list for vaccine distribution. Have you had any communication from the state about the role that you and other providers like yourself will be playing in administering the vaccine once that list is finalized?
No, we have not. We have not heard. Like I said earlier, that on the health department's websites, you can go there and sign up as a provider. Sign up as a provider to be able to give out vaccines, and it's a process.
Right.
And also, if I may jump in quick, sorry, you have to realize that as clinics, we do not have the capacity of storing these vaccines, which are they require intensive or complicated storage, and then the way you give you just give out those vaccines to the patients. So as we are not equipped for that.
Right. Now, Victoria, there are lots and lots of people out there who just want to hear some good news. Based on your experience as a medical officer and a mobile health practitioner, what's your outlook on a timeline for eradicating the coronavirus?
That's a good question to ask. I believe this COVID is gonna live with us. We're gonna have to live with COVID. It just depends on us being adhering to the guidelines of the CDC, like social distancing, staying away from, especially for our population, immigrants, not having parties, and social distancing, wearing masks, and hand washing, and doing what we're supposed to do to overcome this. But I believe there's no timeline that COVID, we're going to eradicate this virus. This is going to live with us.
Well, that was Victoria Overcomer with the Columbus Legacy Nurse Mobile Healthcare, with some good news and some not so great news. Thank you for joining us, Victoria, and we wish you a great holiday season.
Thank you too for having me, and you have a great holiday as well.
Thank you.
Listening to the Apex One Radio News magazine.
On Monday, the Electoral College confirmed the election results, and after a concerted effort on the Republicans' part to overturn those results through dozens of unsuccessful lawsuits and legal briefs over the last month and a half, the election results are in fact final. We are now in the final days of the Trump presidency, and as the country prepares for new leadership, Donald Trump, his family, and his business allies may now be facing numerous legal battles.
As early as 2018, several state governments, as well as the federal government, announced their intention to begin criminal investigations into Mr. Trump's conduct, both in regard to his political office and his involvement with the Trump Organization.
Joining us today is Robert L. Jenkins, Jr., attorney at law and legal commentator, for an in-depth look at these ongoing proceedings into Mr. Trump's business dealings, pending lawsuits stemming from sexual misconduct allegations, and the impact of his legacy on the office of the President of the United States of America. Mr. Jenkins, welcome to the Apex One News magazine.
You have to mute yourself, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you for having me.
So we've heard a lot about ongoing criminal investigations into Trump's business dealings, pending lawsuits, and his use or misuse of the office of the president to create opportunities for personal profit. Until January 20th, he is exempt from prosecution or indictment due to presidential protection. Can you tell us a little bit more about these protections? Are they constitutional or federal protections? And have they always been in place?
Well, yes, historically, they've always been in place. What they really stem from is the notion of separation of powers between our three branches of government. If a president was subject to criminal prosecution while he was in office, it certainly would place the judiciary branch in a superior position in order to impact whether or not he remained in office, and to adversely affect his ability to discharge his duties and responsibilities as the president. Understanding that in the American system of government, each branch are co-equal branches of government, none superior to the other. So it strikes a balance in protecting the president from the judiciary and affording him the ability to execute his responsibilities without fear that the judiciary could remove him from power without the consent of the American people.
Now, since the publication of the Access Hollywood tape during his campaign in October of 2016, President Trump has been accused of sexual assault or sexual misconduct by 26 women. Of those, at least 2 women claimed to have received hush money. Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former personal lawyer, testified under oath that he had, in fact, made arrangements to pay both women under the president's direction and was subsequently found guilty of campaign finance violations. Can these charges also be leveled at Trump once he leaves office? And do you think the defamation lawsuit filed against him by both women will proceed?
Well, certainly it is possible. It is conceivable that once President Trump leaves office on January the 20th, that he could be subject to criminal prosecution on the state as well as on the federal level. With respect to the ongoing defamation lawsuits, those certainly can proceed. We all may recall that when President Clinton was in office, Paula Jones, she filed a lawsuit against him, a civil suit that was able to move forward, and it ultimately led to his impeachment as a consequence of the Monica Lewinsky affair. So certainly civil lawsuits are not barred from moving forward, even while he's in office. And I certainly suspect that once he leaves office, any civil lawsuits that were pending or yet to be filed will move forward. And yes, he would be subject to criminal prosecution once he leaves office.
Another investigation under Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance involves allegations of insurance and bank fraud relating to the Trump Organization. Now, Mr. Vance has filed subpoenas for the president's tax returns for the last 8 years, but to no avail. In his request, he has stated that the tax returns are, quote, public reports of possibly extensive and protracted criminal conduct at the Trump Organization. What is your assessment of this particular case? What exactly are the fraud allegations, and why has it been so difficult to obtain Mr. Trump's tax returns?
Well, certainly, I think ultimately the returns are going to be produced. There are no privacy or other public policy reasons why an individual's tax returns could not be obtained in the course of a criminal investigation. In fact, it's a fairly routine occurrence in this country. Now, whether or not I agree with the assessment that it is a public document, that I don't necessarily agree with, but whether or not ultimately the tax returns will be produced, I have very, very, very little doubt about that. The president has been successful up until this time in frustrating the Manhattan DA from obtaining his tax returns, but ultimately I do believe that those efforts will yield to the rule of law, and ultimately they will be produced.
Attorney, let's talk about the emoluments case. As I understand it, the law against emoluments are actually written in the Constitution. First, what are emoluments exactly? And if they are constitutionally forbidden, why couldn't he be prosecuted for breaking laws against emoluments while in office? Or, at the very least, couldn't they have served as a legal basis for impeachment?
Yes. Well, the emolument clause in the United States Constitution has been with us since the founding of this country. And it is historically rooted in the fact that when the country was first formed, there was a heightened sensitivity to the possibility that those who hold public office in this country could be unduly influenced by foreign powers. And that is through briberies, through gifts, through favors, and things of that nature, to not serve the American interest, but however, to serve some foreign actors' interests. So the clause was designed to prohibit or bar American office holders from receiving things of value from a foreign power. Yes, there's been much talk about President Trump, his organization, his real estate holdings, namely his hotels, when they accept payments from foreign dignitaries for services and goods, whether or not it is in violation of this constitutional prohibition. Certainly, I believe that a strong argument could be made for such, and that it was certainly within the realm of what the founding fathers of this country wanted to preclude. We want to be certain that President Trump or any president is acting on behalf of the American people not his own self-interest, and certainly not the interest of a foreign power.
Mr. Jenkins, Attorney General Bill Barr has been accused of essentially doing President Trump's bidding since he took over as U.S. Attorney General in February 2019. He submitted his resignation this Monday, the same day that the Electoral College confirmed Joe Biden's win for president. Carl Racine, D.C. Attorney General, called Barr's resignation a five-alarm fire on the Mehdi Hasan show on the same day, and says he believes that the Attorney General is now making a run for the hills. Can you explain why Mr. Barr's resignation is causing so much alarm in both political and legal circles?
Well, first and foremost, we have to all acknowledge that Attorney General Barr's tenure in office just for a relatively short period of time, 22 months, has been one of the most controversial tenures of an Attorney General in the history of this country. Certainly he is, called into question as to whether or not he is serving the interests of the American public or whether or not he is serving the private individual interests of President Trump. As Attorney General, he's charged, he's obligated, his duty is to act on behalf of the American public, to serve the rule of law and not the particular interests of the President of the United States. And we've seen time and time again during his 22-month tenure that he has taken positions that certainly are highly questionable, if not flat out at odds with the American public's interest versus that of Mr. Trump. Now, the timing of his resignation certainly is interesting because it comes at a time in which President Trump still having the power to pardon anyone in this country for any federal crimes, he still possesses that power. And whether or not Attorney General Barr is resigning in sufficient time so that President Trump can absolve him of any criminal wrongdoing that might be unveiled later on is certainly an interesting one and one that has aroused suspicions in many legal minds.
Now, there are no laws that guarantee immunity from prosecution to former presidents, but historically there has been a general reluctance to prosecute outgoing presidents in this country. President Ford pardoned Nixon, you know that. The office of the Independent Counsel decided not to indict President Clinton after his impeachment. Now, why has that been the case? And Mr. Jenkins, do you think that could change after President Trump?
Well, we have to first start and recognize and understand and certainly appreciate the fact that the office of President of the United States is one that is held by a public servant. It is something that we look upon with a great deal of reverence and respect. We look at those who have served in that position as not individuals who were seeking some personal gain, but were acting on behalf of the public interest. So historically, we have afforded them a great amount of latitude when it comes to allegations about criminal wrongdoing and given them deference given the office for which they had held and the service that they provided to this country. Now, Mr. Trump may certainly cause a significant shift in that view, given how he has conducted himself while serving in that capacity. I believe that many of his actions have demeaned the office, have brought it down in stature in many Americans' eyes. So I would not be terribly surprised to see that if after he leaves office, we, for the first time in this country, are confronted with a former president actually having to face a criminal prosecution, particularly on the state level.
And in the last 4 years, we've seen numerous reports speculating about the potential damage that President Trump's alleged criminality and general disregard for the Constitution, as you were just saying, has wrought on any number of institutions in American government. How credible are these fears? And if you could paint a picture about the post-Trump political landscape from a legal perspective, what would it look like?
Well, I certainly think that President Trump has done great damage to the office of President of the United States. his departure from certain accepted norms in the office, how he dealt with political rivals, how he dealt with the other two co-branches of government, I think will have a very much lasting impact on this country, and not in a positive way. He has established certain precedents that I hope will not be carried on by his successors in the future, not just his immediate successor. We have to understand that, barring something, unforeseeable happening, President Biden isn't going to be the last American president. There are going to be others, and they're always look to their predecessors for guidance to see what is acceptable behavior in the office. And President Trump, my fear is that he's lowered the standard, and it could lead to future presidents looking at his actions as being acceptable and acting in the same manner. And that's something that certainly wouldn't be in the country's best interest.
Robert L. Jenkins Jr. is an attorney at law and legal commentator. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on the program today.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is the Apex One Radio News Magazine.
Patches of Light is a grassroots nonprofit organization based right here in Columbus, Ohio, that provides emergency assistance to families with severely ill children and who are facing potentially catastrophic hospital bills. CEO and founder Mindy Atwood launched the organization over 20 years ago after her own family's personal experience opened her eyes to the many areas of need faced by parents and families in similar situations.
Ms. Atwood joins us today to talk about her organization and the incredible work they do for the community. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Atwood, and thanks for joining us on the show today. Right. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Atwood. Apparently, we have difficulties reaching out to the CEO and founder of Patches of Light organization, which is a non-profit organization that works in the domain of children and has been helping out with families with children with severe illnesses. Let's find out if she's joining us once again. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Atwood. Okay, you have to unmute yourself, Mrs. Atwood, so we can hear you. Okay, apparently we have some difficulties reaching out to our guests. We'll be right back with her on their program. This is the Apex One News Magazine. From all indications, our guest is now joining us. Mindy Atwood is the founder of Patches of Light, a non-profit organization based right here in Columbus, and it works in the area of children with severe illnesses. And let's find out if she's now joining us on the show. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Atwood. Mrs. Atwood, welcome to the program. Okay, this is the Apex One Radio News Magazine. We will come back to that story in the course of this edition of the Apex One News Magazine. You're listening to the Apex One Radio News Magazine, reaching you live from the studio of Apex One Radio.
In international news, India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, continues to wage war against civil rights activists and government critics in the country. Since Modi's election in 2014, there has been an ideological civil war waging in India, with Modi's party, the BJP, adopting a Hindu supremacist ideology that simultaneously upholds the caste system among Hindus and casts Muslim Indians as a nefarious and unwelcome sector of the country's sizable population. This nationalistic agenda has increased tensions in the country and triggered mass violent protests and an increasing vocal denunciation of the presiding governments, particularly from the academic sector. The international NGO Scholars at Risk recently exposed the staggering efforts undertaken by the BJP to slash academic and press freedoms, including total communications lockdowns in Muslim-majority regions and indefinitely shuttering educational institutions.
Swedish King Carl Gustaf has declared the country's coronavirus strategy a failure as numbers rise in that country. The Nordic country has never imposed lockdown measures, nor legally mandated any coronavirus prevention measures, relying instead on their citizens' sense of civic responsibility. But earlier this week, with Sweden's COVID infections and deaths rising, Swedish Prime Minister Löfven said that he felt that many health officials had underestimated the second wave. Sweden has come under heavy criticism from its neighbors or neighboring countries, namely Denmark, Finland, Norway, who have condemned their neighbor for putting their own prevention efforts at risk.
And for the third time in a row, Yemen ranks at the very top of the International Rescue Committee's humanitarian watch list. The IRC released its watch list for 2021, ranking countries in the grip of humanitarian crises from 1 to 10 based on the urgency of their needs. Yemeni citizens, of course, joined the millions of people in that region in armed rebellion against their oppressive regimes during the advent of the Arab Spring in 2011. The war was further escalated in 2015 when the US-backed Saudi-led coalition attempted to restore President Abdirabbu Mansur Hadi. The IRC warns that continued war, widespread hunger and famine, and a complete breakdown in international support has and will dramatically worsen the crisis in the war-torn country in 2021.
Somalia severs diplomatic ties with Kenya and other Kenyan politicians or Kenyan diplomats out of Mogadishu within 7 days, citing the violation of the nation's sovereignty. A week earlier, Somalia ordered the immediate expulsion of the Kenyan ambassador to Somalia, Lucas Tumbo, and recalled their own ambassadors from Kenya. In both instances, the Somali Minister for Information stated that Kenya was constantly interfering with Somalia's internal affairs, violating that country's sovereignty. The two countries have been engaged in a long-term dispute over maritime border relationships, with each country laying claim to a 62,000 square foot triangle of the Indian Ocean that borders both nations and which is believed to hold lucrative oil and gas deposits.
And that's it for our foreign news roundup. We'll be right back with Mindy Atwood of Patches of Light.
listening to the Apex One Radio News Magazine.
Patches of Light is a grassroots nonprofit organization based right here in Columbus, Ohio, that provides emergency assistance to families with severely ill children and who are facing potentially catastrophic hospital bills. The CEO and founder, Mindy Atwood, launched the organization over 20 years ago after her own family's personal experience opened her eyes to the many areas of need faced by parents and families in similar situations.
And Mrs. Atwood joins us today to talk about the organization and the incredible work they do for the community. Welcome to the program, Mrs. Atwood, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Mrs. Atwood, could you tell us a little bit about your organization and what inspired you to launch Patches of Light so many years ago?
Yes, 20 years ago, my husband and I, experiencing a child with cancer and a child with open heart surgery, had decided that we wanted to help other families. And in the process, it became an organization to some social workers at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And now we are across the United States, and we feel very blessed to be able to help any family that is sent to us for assistance.
Mindy, what are some of the lesser known or unexpected challenges faced by families who have a sick child or children with life-altering illnesses that require long-term hospitalization?
Wow. There are so many. I learned over 20 years that people assume doing okay when your child's diagnosed with an illness that you'll be okay. But everything changes the moment you're diagnosed with a critical or terminal illness. Insurance only covers so much. Many people, there's a saying that everyone is one paycheck away from being homeless. A lot of these families take off unpaid, and they have no money coming in. And because they have insurance, they don't qualify for any assistance from any of the other programs out there. So social workers will send their applications to us, and we'll provide whatever we can to get them through those hard times, because many families have to leave their children alone in the hospital to go to work. They have no choice, and children need to have their parents with them when they're sick. So our goal is, when we came up with the name Patches of Light, is just to be that little patch of light.
Minty, you work in partnership with Nationwide Children's Hospital, which is the premier children's hospital in Ohio. Patches of Light has a volunteer staff working at Nationwide Children's Hospital that reviews the cases of families in need to determine how you can help them. How did your partnership with the hospital begin, and how does it work exactly? How do parents or families in that situation connect with Patches of Light?
Well, we began our association through our each came to us with an application, and we depend on their discretion. We don't know. We're kind of like the show The Voice. We don't know anything about them until the need comes to us, and then we know that the need has been verified. And
we are sorry for that technical hitch. Apparently, we can't hear our guests properly. We'll probably have her back on the airwaves. This is Apex One Radio. This is the Apex One News Magazine. You're listening to the Apex One Radio News magazine.
Observers have described the 2020 edition of the Bonte Digital Media Awards, the BDMA, as a resounding success. This assessment is based on the huge turnout at the fourth annual edition of the event, which took place in Douala, Cameroon this Thursday, December the 17th. The Bonte Digital Media Awards is the leading recognition event in Cameroon that identifies and rewards professionals in the digital media and entertainment sectors.
Bonte Njebel is the founder and CEO of Bonte Media, under whose banner the BDMA is organized. He now joins us from Douala to talk about this year's organization. Bonte, welcome to the program and thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us on the program today, Bonte. We are trying to reach our guests. Apparently, the sound is not going across. Bonte, can you hear us? Thanks for joining us on the program today.
Yeah, I can get you guys 5 on 5.
Okay. Now, first, speaking with you off mic, Bonte, you mentioned that the BDMA 2020 held simply to fulfill its original commitment to be consistent. Were you saying that this year's edition of the award was hard to come by?
Yes, as we all know, it's been a very difficult year for Cameroon and the world at large, and to put together an event, bringing people, knowing fully well that there are COVID measures and need to be respected, and having partners and sponsors that need to be part of an event was really difficult. So, and we coupled with the fact that a lot of events this year were cancelled. A lot of events this year were cancelled nationally and internationally. So we just needed to do something, because to start and stop, it's very difficult to pick up. So we just decided to do the BDMA to make sure that we keep the tempo moving.
Observers say that BDMA 2020 did not only score a passing mark, but that it did exceedingly well. What do you think accounted for this success?
Well, we have partners and sponsors who stood by us from the very beginning, from the very first edition of the BDMA. Some of which include Orange Cameroon, Apex One Radio, which we are live now on, and a host of others, coupled with a dynamic team that's always present and handy, because to pull together an event in Cameroon is really difficult, and you cannot do that if you don't have the right energy around. So we made sure our partners were on board, we collaborated, and those equally nominated, they were very instrumental to the success of this event this year.
Right. So every such event comes with a patch of controversy, and in the highly contested Best Music Video Director of the Year category, Dr. Nkeng Stephen carried the day again. And this raised concerns as to why he has been the only laureate in this category since the start of the BDMA. Is there anything you want to tell us about this, Bonte?
Well, BDMA, as we all know, it's at its 4th edition that held on the 17th of December. So the public voted, and we can't contest that. So the first edition, the first ever winner of the Bonte was equally an amazing video director. There are other people who are doing great jobs, but to win an award means you've stood out from others, because all of those who are nominated are doing an amazing job. So the voting process was done. The people who choose and added to the quality of work that was delivered by King this year realized that, he stood out compared to others. So if he deserves it, he wins.
How different was BDMA 2020 from the previous years? Can you explain any new innovations that were brought in this time?
Well, compared to other editions, this year was done by the poolside, something we don't do normally often, because awards, people have the perception that awards are meant for indoor events, closed doors and stuff. So we decided to do something different because we wanted to make sure that people have a different experience, because coming to an award is not only about those who are going to receive a trophy to go home with, but it's also an experience that people should come and witness to ensure that they are able to share in the joy and happiness of those who were nominated and those who won. So we believe that the first thing we did was to ensure that there was more communality among all those who attended the event this year.
A hard question, Mbonte, but tell us about the resources you put into this edition of BDMA. So did you spend millions to make it happen?
An event is an event. COVID or no COVID, there are some things that can't be go unspent, or you cannot do without. Stage, sound, venue, light, communication, and those are tens and hundreds of thousands, if not millions. But we, compared to other editions, we didn't spend much because we tried to see how we could reduce the number, because the award show usually has 10,000 or 1,000 and more persons. So we decided to reduce the number and to reduce logistics, because it's been a difficult year, and the resources we usually pump in, we couldn't do that again this year because it's been tough years. So we decided to see how we reduce our costs, but always making sure we provide quality experience to people who come to the event. And as it's known, the most prestigious digital gathering in Cameroon, we ensure that we kept the standards.
Mbonte Njebel is the founder and CEO of Mbonte Media, under whose banner the BDMA is organized every year. This year, the awards was in its 4th edition. Mbonte, Wacho, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ernest.
As we go away, after failing to reach a vote for the new coronavirus relief bill, there are fears another government shutdown could happen. In this edition of the news magazine, we looked at the CARE Act programs expiring across the country and established that there was urgent need to prevent a potentially catastrophic outcome for millions of Americans.
As Sweden has failed to uphold its coronavirus prevention model status after resting on its laurels and becoming a high-risk zone for the spread of the virus. We had details on that story in this edition of the Apex One News Magazine.
And finally, in sports, we will join Solomon Atta next week in Johannesburg, South Africa, during which time he will paint a picture of that country 10 years after hosting the FIFA World Cup.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of the program. Thanks for joining us. We will be back next week at the same day, same time, same station on apexoneradio.com. Ernest, goodbye and have a great weekend.
Do have a fantastic one as well, Noella. Bye.